Hello, and welcome to the first commentary day where I'm not talking about Hassan and the travesty of Twitch React content. So, right here, what we're doing today is we're taking a look at, if you don't know the channel, The Closer Look, they're quite popular. We're taking a look at his video on Skyrim's magic, and what we're going to do is a world building experiment where we establish a magic system because we'll use this as a talking springboard as well as making our own stuff, but we're going to establish a magic system and talk about how the world's history would have changed if the magic were introduced at any period of time. Because one thing that a lot of people talk about with world building is how magic systems don't usually fit, or sometimes you'll just have magic has always existed. It's just human history is went the same exact way, but with new magic that's always been there. And that usually is very unbelievable. So, what we're going to do is begin with the Closer Look's first opening statements. If you are annoyed by how the Closer Look talks in his videos, I can understand. He's a little bit overly dramatic in the way he presents his arguments, but I'm fine with it. So, let's listen to what he has to say.
When I first played Skyrim back in 2013 and was getting familiar with the magic systems, I couldn't put my finger on it at the time, but I knew something was wrong.
Well, funny thing is, when I first ever played Skyrim, so of course I'm going to comment on this video as much as I want, but we will also take breaks to work on our own magic system. But as much as I can say about Skyrim and the magic system, all I understand, because I've watched this video, of course, I'm not going to give away everything that the video says, but as much as I can say about the magic system, I never interacted with the magic system of Skyrim, except for the
Joestar
Dragonborn.
Gaiden said, "Hi."
Hello. So, but I've never interacted with Skyrim's magic system. I was just never interested in the magic in the game. The only thing I was interested was the illusion magic because I love illusion
Joestar
magic.
Gaiden said, "Bro, I finally bought the full setup. I am decked out."
The full setup? You mean like full stream setup? That I'm confused now. Are you the Joestar that I know?
Joestar Gaiden said, "Gaming PC monitor everything."
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, congratulations. I'm glad you got your full setup. But as I was saying about the whole Skyrim thing, I've always been interested in magic systems regarding barriers and illusion because I don't think people use those often enough in Magic because they're so complicated to use, especially if you
Joestar
don't have any
Gaiden
rules.
said, "I am the Joestar you know."
Okay, thank goodness. I believe I still follow you on Twitch.
Joestar Gaiden said, "Thank you."
Yes. But the reason I think that most people try to avoid things like barriers and illusion is
Joestar Gaiden
they're usually
said,
like supplementary
"Skyrim
parts
is
of
very
magic
good."
systems. And it's the case for I think one of the greatest examples of a magic that has illusions mixed with just normal blasting magic that everybody uses is Naruto. It's a very good example of a series that does that, where you have they have the three types of magic, and it's taijutsu. Well, taijutsu isn't really magic, but it kind of is at the same time. They have ninjutsu and then genjutsu. Ninjutsu is like all of the moves that Naruto uses are ninjutsu with his giant sphere ball that kills people. And then you have genjutsu, which is the illusion magic, and after a while, people just drop their illusion magic because you notice throughout the entire Shippuden era of Naruto, they don't use genjutsu anymore. You rarely see it, and the only time you ever see it is with Uchiha people, so any of the people with the special eyes, because they use magic for free. They don't really have to use that much energy to cast it. But then the same thing goes with Skyrim. That's why a lot of the stuff with illusion is not very well made. I can just look up right now Skyrim Illusion Magic School. We could just look at all of them. Okay, so we got
Joestar Gaiden said, "The system sounds pretty complex."
Well, Skyrim, if it was fully well thought out, you'd realize that there's a lot wrong with it. Although I still like Skyrim, of course. I just don't think the magic system is the best. Like clairvoyance, how is that illusion? You're just showing yourself where to go. Courage and fury, those are mental manipulation. That's more like psychic abilities. And this is just this seems like a DLC thing.
Said, "Hello."
Hello.
Joestar Gaiden said, "I'm Mugia, hi."
Then we got calm, fear, muffle, vampire seduction. All these are mental manipulation. None of these seem like illusion magic to me. And out of all the things that I could say is invisibility is an illusion because you're essentially making it so that people can see through you. And I guess, are there seriously nothing else? What? Oh, muffle. I guess muffle too, because it's an auditory illusion. You're getting rid of the sound of your own footsteps. So those are the only two examples of actual illusion magic. All of this other stuff is just mental manipulation, where you're taking someone's brain and scrambling it for a little bit. So you can see why I was a little disappointed, because my favorite magic is all this stuff, but then as all the illusion stuff, but they only got 2 out of how many spells? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Out of 18 spells, only 2 of them are correct in being called illusion magic, unless you want to call mental illusion, but it's not even that. If they described it differently, that would work, because you could do like fear. What you could be doing there is making it so their brain sees you as this crazy creature, so that would be an illusion, but they don't describe it that way. They just say, oh, they're afraid of you. That's it. There's not a lot to go off of there. But when you know what you can do with illusion, it makes it so much more difficult to function in a story. So that's why you have to limit it in some way, and that's where Skyrim, their limit is that there's only 2 ways of doing illusion, and it's just making it so people can't hear you or can't see you. I would prefer if you could send like images of yourself and they could attack that. That's an illusion. It would be so interesting to see what they could do. But let's see what Mr. Closer Look has to say.
I didn't understand what or why, but when I used the magic in that game and sent fire at a bandit in one direction and swung my magic sword at a mutated spider in the other, I never enjoyed it. I mean, don't get me wrong, I loved playing.
Alright, what I can agree with him there is I've only ever made one full caster build before, and I had the least fun with that. So I can agree with him there that I also feel like there's something wrong with the magic, but I think it's just Skyrim's combat is just not very well thought out. It's entertaining if you're over leveled, because then you can just mess around and do all these weird attacks, but like the optimal way to play is sword and board, or it seems like, is to either sneak attack or sword and board somebody with shield bashes and then a strike and then block it again, shield bash and strike over and over. Because that's my first ever playthrough of the game. I just so happened to choose the most entertaining way to play the game, which is stealth archer plus shield mace. I used maces because I'm a weirdo. Everybody likes swords and axes, but I like the mace because it ignores armor, and I like that. Okay, let's continue.
The game, and I wouldn't have completed 4 whole playthroughs if I didn't adore it, but it was specifically the magic systems in that game that set me on edge. So much so that in all of my various playthroughs, I've gone out of my way to avoid using that magic as much as possible. And every time I've thought about it since, it's been aggravating in the most...
Well, just watching that clip makes me think of stealth as a magic system. You just walk up to someone's face and just go and hit them. Oh my god. Stealth.
Irritating way, like an itch under my skin that I don't have the ability to scratch because I've never come close to understanding.
I will say the only thing that does make sense, that's really good about the magic system, is Dragonborn. Being able to be a Dragonborn and no one else having access to shouts is a great way to take a magic system because that's seemingly overpowered. Because if everybody was a Dragonborn, there'd be a real problem with world building in this game. But it's just you and maybe the first ever Dragonborn in the DLC. And then you have the Greybeards, who are also dragon, or no, I don't know if they're Dragonborns. I think they're just studiers of shouts. But all you have there is you have
Yugia said, I like dragons.
Why did it pause? Yes, I love dragons too. I love a lot of the shouts that they got. But so all I can say is that the only world building you really need with that is that there used to be a lot of dragons, because that's what they say. There used to be a lot of dragons around. And now that dragons are back and a Dragonborn is here, this is the perfect opportunity to get rid of the dragons again, because they've been terrorizing everybody. Because Dragonborn can truly kill dragons. And the only other connection to being Dragonborn is people who can use shouts. And those are people who have taken advantage of this power and learned how to use it with great risk to themselves. Because you have Ulfric Stormcloak, who is the only other character, living character that can use shouts, besides the Greybeards and you. Which is great, because the more you limit it, the less likely you are to have any world building issues.
Why Skyrim's magic just felt so boring to me. That was until I picked up Death Stranding, and Hideo Kojima helped me in finding the answer that I had long lost hope of.
Okay, unfortunately, I have not played this game, so I will have to take every description of this game's premise at face value for what the closer look says here.
Ever knowing. Now, Death Stranding is a divisive game. It's a Marmite game. You either love it or you hate it, because it's essentially the most comprehensively fleshed out fetch quest ever made. For people who don't mind fetch quests, it's a masterpiece. But for the people who do, it's, well, the opposite. But while I played Death Stranding, as I wrestled with the idea of if I even liked the gameplay or not, something else weighed on my mind. And right now, I simply have to give credit where it is due. Because the world building in Death Stranding, it's beautiful.
Well, all I can say so far, based on the clips that he showed me, is that the game looks really good. Or at least visually looks good. But if it is just a long, drawn-out fetch quest, I can see why people would not like it. Because my understanding is that you're doing a lot of just deliveries and stuff. throughout the game, and your whole purpose is to most of the gameplay is walking through the terrain and trying to angle yourself so that you don't drop all your supplies on the floor. So I can see if someone didn't want to be doing that for hours and hours.
Yugia said,
it's
I should look into it then. I like fetch quests.
I heard this game is very violent and creepy though, so if you are okay with violent and creepy, then you might also like this.
It is some of the best.
Because we already got a perfect image right here with the baby stuck in a giant spider web with this guy.
World building I have ever seen. As I played, I completely bought this fictional post-apocalyptic America with gleeful immersion. But once I finished the game and I took a step back, I compared it to Skyrim, and I realised that for all of that game's exhaustive world building, Skyrim never once came close to immersing me in the same way that Death Stranding did. And
that's true. There's a lot of, and when you play Skyrim, there's a lot of characters who will just spout expositional dialogue to you just to explain situations and stuff, but I can see why he would consider it not as good as Death Stranding, just because I know what Death Stranding's magic system is and how it transforms the world compared to Skyrim's, because there's so much magic, so much politics, so much of all of that stuff.
That makes no sense, right? Because Skyrim has this exhaustive gallery of gods. The wiki website has over 65,000 articles, for Christ's sake. There are 1,000,001 magic systems, thousands of characters, dozens of secret
Oh yeah, so when he says 1,000,001 magic systems, I can respect the fact that he uses each magical spell as a magic system, because that is true in the aspect of world building, that if you have one spell that is completely different from all the other ones, that counts as a magic system, because what you're doing is you're adding an element to the world. So if I were to add, let's say, let's say elemental spells. We have all these elemental spells and they take mana to cast rather than physical energy. So all these elemental spells, we have fire, ice, and lightning. Lightning, if you have access to lightning really, really early in development, there's a good chance that you're going to be able to harness lightning for energy a lot quicker than we would have, because we used metal and wires and stuff. But if you could just produce lightning for mana cost rather than stamina cost, or rather than physical energy cost, there's a problem in that, because you should at least have the most rudimentary generator, because there's been thousands of years of use of this types of magic, so there's already that problem. Then you have ice, where you can transport food across long distance. You can store food for long periods of time, because you can create ice and make your own refrigerator. It's a huge deal to be able to store food, because that progresses society forward. That's exactly what most overproductions of food did in early society. And then you have fire. Don't even get me started on fire. You can also make a steam engine with fire. You can live in the coldest places on Earth, because you could warm yourself up just for free, just by making a fire come out. There's so much you can do with just the elemental magic. So when they have things like dismay, that makes in the week. Oh no, this is a dragon shower. I'm less mean to that. But if you have stuff like fury, which makes everybody just randomly angry, there's a lot of issues with fury, because you could take down entire armies by yourself just by making all of them fight each other. That's why there's there might be world building issues in Skyrim, because everything is a magic system and none of the world reflects the existence of that magic. So I think that's where he's going with this.
Million and one magic systems, many different sapient species that make up the population, and 100 different towns and villages. There is such an immense quantity of world building in the Elder Scrolls series, yet such a simple game like Death Stranding with a relatively simple world captured my imagination more than Skyrim's ever did. Now, I'm not saying that Death Stranding's world is somehow objectively better than Skyrim's. You just can't judge things like that in an objective way.
So the problem with him saying that is can't be objective. Well, if you're judging it by an objective standard, yes, you can. So if you're taking the objective standard of consistency, Death Stranding's world is consistent with the magic that exists within it, while Skyrim's isn't. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to say based on the descriptions we've gotten so far. Except we haven't. That's just based on the premises that I've already come up with for the problems with the magic system in Skyrim. But let's see what he has to say about Skyrim's magic system.
But what I am saying is that the world of Death Stranding has a vital quality that Skyrim's lacks. So enough beating around the bush. That quality that Death Stranding has that Skyrim's doesn't...
Is it verisimilitude? I think he's going to say verisimilitude.
That after a fair bit of research, I haven't actually found any instance where a writer has ever coined a name for it, which kind of shocked me because you'd think it's one of those fundamental building blocks for world building. So for the sake of this video, just so we can name this thing and move on, we're going to call this idea internal realism.
Yeah, that's... I think he's made a mistake because in his research because there's a very clear word and it's verisimilitude. Let me see if it actually comes up. I don't know how to spell it. Oh, I guess that's not technically appearance of being real. I thought it was more literary use. Okay. So I guess it's a version of verisimilitude. So it's instead of saying, oh, it has the appearance of being true or real, what you could say is internal verisimilitude. So within the world, everything that happens seems real. Not necessarily our world. But I guess my word, I'd never looked up the definition of this before. I've just heard it used in place of internal realism, so I guess that's my issue. So we'll continue here.
And what is internal realism? Well, I would say it's how real the world is, but there are plenty of fantasy worlds out there with crazy magic that have this strong...
Yeah, people use... I've seen plenty of channels use verisimilitude to describe...
realistic feel, so...
A realistic feel, yes. That's exactly... Because it says the appearance of being real.
I would say...
I guess that's why you can use it, but it in this context, it seems like the definition's being a little stretched.
It's exactly that. It's, does the world feel real? Despite the fact that it may be inherently unrealistic. Okay, so you know what a plot hole is, right? It's when the plot doesn't make sense because the logic doesn't add up. Well, when a creator fails to have internal realism, it's exactly like a plot hole, except it's not for the story, it's for the world that...
Okay, so he's using it in terms of world building rather than just plot, which is fine. Although a lot of times when you have a world that isn't consistent, the plot will suffer too. So an idea is if you had the Lord of the Rings and you didn't know anything about the Eagles beforehand, them being like an upper being on par with Gandalf and some of the gods. If you didn't know any of that, at the end of the movie, you'd wonder why they never brought the Eagles, right? But they never explained that I don't think they explained that in the movie, which is the problem. So, in that sense, there's a problem with the world building because we never knew that the Eagles were a thing, and then randomly they show up at the end. So now we look back at the old part and go, but why didn't they use this? And that's the same thing that you can look at with Star Wars. Where if you have in The Last Jedi, there's the light speed ramming scene where Admiral Holdo goes light speed into the big ship, and so much destruction happens. Like all these ships get blown up, including the two that are in the primary crash. And the problem with that is it introduces a world building problem, but that also creates plot holes in earlier parts of the series. Because every single other scene where there's a big threatening thing, it just makes it so you wonder why people aren't thinking of using this very usable tool. So it not only so when you make a world building issue that when it comes to magic, it also makes a plot problem further down the line as well as in previous plot points. Because you can retroactively ruin something just by adding new magic that contradicts other parts. And that's where I've seen some people criticize, if you don't want spoilers for No Way Home, turn off the audio for at least 30 seconds, or pause it for 30 seconds and just skip ahead. But in No Way Home, Doctor Strange has a spell that can make everybody forget everything about something, right? And the problem with that is, since they introduced that now, all they could have done in the first place in Infinity War was just make Thanos forget something. They could make him forget, hey, I want the Infinity Stones, or make him forget about his planet or something, because his whole motivation is about his planet. So that's just a single example of how, or a couple examples of how world building issues when it comes to magic systems can feed into the plot or retroactively ruin earlier plots.
It inhabits. Okay, so as an example, in Skyrim, there's a
Yes,
quest in the city Morthal where you get on the wrong side of the law and get thrown into the local jail where the prisoners are forced to mine. And when the player gets thrown into this prison, they have everything taken off them. Every piece of armor and weaponry in their inventory is confiscated, and that makes sense, right? Because it would be totally ridiculous for these guards to allow any prisoner to enter the jail with any weapon of any kind. However, I'm sure anyone who's played Skyrim before knows where I'm going with this, because
so his problem is that they're not putting any magic dampeners in any way, or they're not getting rid of your ability to cast magic.
The moment you get thrown into the prison with the other unarmed, defenseless prisoners, you can do this. Now, is it just me, or is there a subtle reason, just a tiny little nagging hole that doesn't make very much sense here? You can summon fire magic, or ice magic, or magic swords, or use the shout magic and massacre the prison.
Okay, the shout magic, you can't stop that unless you tie their mouth, but you'd have to know they're the Dragonborn ahead of time. So there's an issue with world building there. Although it's hard to imagine that it would spread quick enough that your description of your face, your name, would be the Dragonborn enough that all of the surrounding cities would know that you're the Dragonborn. So because I know that they put a gag over Ulfric Stormcloak's mouth at the beginning of the game because they're stopping him from using shouts. So there's that, and then if you tie someone's hands behind their back, they also can't use magic. So there's that.
Population en masse the very moment you get put into this jail. There is nothing the guards do to cater for your magic abilities before they throw you in. The guards act as if the concept that a magic user might be in their prison is a total impossibility. And if magic in this world were an extremely rare thing, it would kind of make sense that they wouldn't think about magical security.
Oh, that's okay. So if it was rare, that's a good way to make it so the world building doesn't suffer as much, because that's a lot of the problem that I have with D&D is that there's a lot of spells that are super strong and and world changing. That could be world changing, but a lot of the setting of D&D doesn't address that. So whenever I try to run a D&D campaign, what I do is I put a lot of effort into making sure that everybody knows that magic is not the most common, and if it is common, it's limited by the god that you serve, right? So in D&D they have the concept of the weave, kind of like the force, and what you do when you're casting spells is you're tapping into the weave and using its energy to cast spells. So if you're casting a lightning bolt spell, you're taking the weave and turning it into lightning bolt. And the way I world build around that is what I say is that you can't tap into the weave unless you have a connection with a god for the most part. If you don't have a god that you worship that gives you access to the weave, there's something super special about you. So there's that.
Security so much. But the problem with this is that magic in the world of Skyrim is far from a rare thing. A huge chunk of the population is well versed in using magic spells. I mean, as far as I can tell, every last man, woman and child has the ability to learn a spell that's capable of harming another person. So why in this prison do the guards do?
So the thing about that is I think he overestimates how many people can learn magic and how common it is. Because I will say that it's weird that they have no concept of magic dampening or protection against magic users in the prison. Especially with magic being so easy to learn, but I'm pretty sure what they're in terms of gameplay, they wanted you to have access to magic if you wanted to be a magic user pretty easily. Which does hurt the world building if you consider everybody to be on the same level as you, but you're supposed to be a special character in that world. That's why you're the Dragonborn who can learn shouts just by reading the name of the shout and then having a dragon soul bestowed upon you. So there's a lot to it rather than just, ooh, everybody can learn magic. Well, it's not that common. The most people you see using it are the Thalmor, which are one of the ruling class, and then you have the Mages College. And most people know if you're someone from the Mages College because you dress that way. And then the only other people that actually use it are vampires, and vampires were added later, or if they weren't added later, they're not very common, and it's pretty easy to tell if someone's a vampire.
Their due diligence of taking away the prisoners' physical weapons, but do nothing to cater for the large percentage of the population.
See, they're missing this point here. This is also a group. She's like an insurgent for this quest line because I've only done it once ever. But she's an informant for the Thalmor or something. She's an informant for a group that uses a lot of magic, so her using magic is not that ridiculous.
That can wave their hand and burn someone to death. The answer, the excuse for this feature in the world, it isn't just negligence from the guards' perspective. There is no excuse, because if this world had even a shred of internal realism, the guards would do at least something to try and nullify your powers before they throw you in with the other prisoners, and the fact that they don't is immersion-shatteringly unbelievable. I mean, there are potions that already exist in the game that inhibit...
See, this I never thought of, because when he was talking about it, I was always saying, oh, magic dampening, like crystals and stuff. Now you can force feed someone magic dampening potions, or just say that it's mixed in with the food.
Magical abilities when taken. Surely it would be standard practice for every prison in the world to force these
because there's plenty. So that's something there. If there aren't that many magicians around, because it is pretty rare. I think the closer look is pushing a little too hard on it being rare. or at being not rare. But alchemists are not rare at all. You find an alchemist at every city. So take a look at that. They know what the effects of alchemy ingredients is. So it's not too far off that they would develop a magic dampening potion for prisons to use.
Magic potions into the diet of all of their prisoners,
Yeah.
otherwise it would be a security nightmare. Bethesda added their magic systems and totally failed to consider what the ramifications would be if said magic really existed. And as a result, the world is unimmersive, at least to me, because the world has a great gaping hole in it, and Skyrim has way more holes than just this one. This is just one example to prove my point, and we will explore other errors in Skyrim's world building later. But before we do, let's compare that to Death Stranding.
Okay, so even despite having a lot of context, because I've watched this video before, I still don't understand what a lot of these clips are doing in Death Stranding. Because I have no context for any of this.
So in Death Stranding, there's this element called timefall. Essentially, as a result of this paranormal apocalypse, rain causes extreme aging to everything it touches. When I first saw timefall in Death Stranding, where it touched the protagonist's hair and it instantly turned grey, I thought it was pretty cool. It's a creative idea that we haven't really seen before, and I expected it to be a little more than a fun gimmick. But the thing is, it evolved to be so much more than that.
So let's take Timefall and just think about what happens there. Because if there's a whole region of the world where rain just turns everything old, you'd have to develop a lot of your clothing out of material that ages well. Kind of like if you've ever seen the comic version of Infinity War, or not, like, sorry, the comic version, the cartoon version of I think it's the Infinity Saga. Thanos ages everybody on the Avengers, and when Thor ages, he gets stronger because Thor is a god. So that is something there. So you have to find a bunch of material that ages well as Thor does in the cartoon. You want, because a lot of metals would not be very useful anymore because rust. Although rust is specifically with oxygen degradation, I don't know if that's included in it. Are things rusty just from getting timefall on them, or is it just because it's wet and then not dried off?
Anything on the player's back rusts when it's raining, which degrades its condition, okay, and presents this whole issue.
So it does rust.
The protagonist has to deal with in his daily life. If you leave anything out in the open, like a truck or a ladder, it will gradually rust and deteriorate because of that timefall. And all of this is cool. It makes the world feel more dynamic as we see the repercussions of this timefall's existence. But then we see a guy fall to the grisly fate of being trapped beneath a vehicle, exposed in the open, and then this rain hits his face and instantly ages him in this just beautifully horrifying cutscene. We see the awful human cost that happens when someone gets caught out in the rain, and this timefall is gradually transcending a mere gimmick. It's becoming a downright fascinating aspect of this world's lore.
So, I have a thing that I had to have explained to me by my brother who actually played the game. But the timefall, the way it works is once it hits something, its effect is gone. So you can take the water later, and or you can if it drips onto you from your jacket onto you, you're fine because it's already used its effect on your jacket.
And the effect of this timefall, it reaches further than just the human cost. It affects the ecology as well. When I played and look at the landscapes, I noticed that this world is almost entirely moss and grass, but Why? I mean, sure, you come across the rare copse of trees here and there, but the vast majority of the landscape is this barren bog. But this is set in the United States, right? The US ecosystem doesn't look anything like this, so why does this world have such simple...
See, this is I will jump on this just as much as the closer look does. I really enjoy this aspect of it. I never played the game, but this is an amazing world building, like, I guess neat pick. It's the best word to describe it. It's a really great effect of good world building. Or not good world building, but a great effect of good writing to world build in a way that makes sense with the world. So what we're going to do after we've watched this video is we're going to make our own magic system for fun. And we're going to just come up with rules or not rules, but what would happen if you implemented a certain magic in the world, in our world, just to see what would happen.
Plant life. And then I realised it's because of the timefall. The reason why there are so few trees and bushes is because the timefall rapidly ages everything it touches. It essentially kills any living thing that's exposed to it. That means deer, that means squirrels and birds and bugs and trees. So that's why it's all moss and grass, because the rain has completely obliterated this world's ecosystem and makes it so only very short-lived plant life like moss and grass has the ability to grow anymore. And one thing that's just the cherry on top is there is no in-game journal or wiki article explaining why the ecosystem is so devastated, or even stating that the ecosystem is devastated. It's just...
Yeah, that's one of the cooler parts about it, is that you're not told this. First time I ever noticed this was when I watched this video. There's a lot you can do with world building that isn't explicitly said. It's just explicitly visible. That's the best way to do a lot of world building, which is a problem when I'm trying to write a lot of what I'm doing. I made my magic system, and I've already tried to adapt it as much as possible to, because I have 4 different versions of magic, and I explicitly set all the rules down for all the magics, and then I tried to build the world around those magics existing. And it's a very tedious process, but it ends up in a very satisfying world to think about. Because every time I leave for work in the afternoon, I'm always thinking about new aspects to add that are based off of the magic system that already exists in that world. So think about that next time you watch something. If something's used, just think about why it's not used later, and if they give you an explanation, that's great. Because they can cover their tracks that way. By telling you, yeah, we can't use this over and over again because there's problems.
The game, and Kojima passes the ultimate test of any world builder, where he adds something really cool, but has the discipline to not shove it into the player's face and leaves it in the background. As a result, most people probably won't even make the connection that this is why the landscape looks like this, but when they do, it just makes the world so much cooler. Now, that effect on the ecosystem is a really interesting attention to detail, and it really does help to make the world feel more interesting, but I think the moment when I was playing Death Stranding, when it just sealed the deal, where I just surrendered my...
So, something about that with aging everything, you can see in that clip right there, all of it's also growing quickly too. So it's not the fact that it's all just like shriveling because it's aging, it's also growing out of the ground too. So what is essentially happening to all these plants is they're sprouting, flowering, seeding, dying, sprouting, flowering, seeding, dying over and over and over really quick during any long period of time fall, which is a very interesting way of using an aging mechanic.
and it really does help to make the world feel more interesting. But I think the moment when I was playing Death Stranding, when it just sealed the deal, where I just surrendered myself to loving this world and knew I just had to make this video, is when I stumbled across a brewery, and this brewery just so happens to use Timefall. They take that extremely deadly rain that has ruined society, destroyed the ecosystem, and caused countless deaths, apply some good old human ingenuity, and they use it to decrease the amount of time it takes to brew beer and make the whole production process so much cheaper.
And that is something that I find super interesting, because that's most of what I've been thinking about when I've been making my world, is how do people take advantage of it, and how does the world adapt to fit that thing, right? So with one aspect of my world, a lot of the magic takes physical energy, so like actual calories almost. Like it's not good to use literal calories because it ruins a lot of the things that I use, but I'm saying like physical energy, so it drains your body of energy in general. So it's I use calories to count it, so it's easier for me to conceptualize. But one of the things I thought about was, you know how if you look at human history and how we've hybridized farming production, a lot of our farming production in recent years has been mainly, so the way we hybridize all of our food is specifically for look. A lot of our food is hybridized for look. That's the reason we have yellow corn instead of all the other types of maize that there are. There's so many, including like there's a lot of I think it's peas and green beans. A lot of the plants that we eat are hybridized for look rather than nutrients or taste, right? And that's where you get into the world that I'm making. If it was set in like a late medieval period, and you were hybridizing for energy, that's what you'd have to do in order to fuel this type of magic, because in order to use it very often, you'd have to have more energy in your body. So what you have to do is make it so in order for everybody not to die because they want to use the magic as well as live within their society, you have to overproduce nutrient dense food that looks like trash but is really tasty because of how much sugar there is and really nutrient dense. So there's that. You have to think about how the world would adapt to something that they want to take advantage of. And that's what this does very nicely, is they take this mechanic of aging things really fast and use it to create beer, which is an amazing innovation. And the problem is you have to be really well thought out and creative when you're thinking of this stuff, because you have to essentially come up with the ideas that thousands of people would do, or millions of people would make in this world. So it's such a tedious process, but it's really, really cool when you encounter this type of stuff in a world.
So far, we see Timefall take people's lives and ruin our day and generally be a total nuisance. But in this tiny corner of this world, we see these people exploit this deadly paranormal element in a creative way where it's actually a benefit to society.
It's just like with the grass, what you could do is you could age your crops and have a really quick cutting system that can get it out of the rain really quickly once you cut it, so you could grow all the wheat that is required, or the barley that's required for making beer, or I guess hops. You need hops. You get all the hops that is required for making beer, and you can grow it super fast by taking advantage of how Timefall works, or growing it in an environment where you can administer Timefall in a controlled environment. So there's a lot you can do in terms of world building that comes from just a single element being added to the story.
society for a change. And that is just awesome. If Timefall were a thing in the real world, of course someone would have the bright idea of using it to decrease the time it takes to ferment alcohol. It makes the whole world of Death Stranding feel so realistic, so immersive, because not only are the ramifications of Timefall extremely well thought out, where every effect it would have on a living world is considered, but the people in that world don't just act like Skyrim's NPCs. They act like human beings and do the very human thing.
See, that's the biggest thing, is you want your humans in your world to be smart in some way. Because a lot of people like to go into the past and just say everybody is just dumb. No, it's more like they're just uneducated. Because there's a difference between uneducated and unintelligent. Because that's what a lot of kids get wrong too. But we get that wrong about a lot of ages of the past, where we think that cavemen were unintelligent, but they were intelligent enough to, I guess, what we say they did. They were intelligent enough to make fire. They were intelligent enough to band in groups to make sure that they would survive better. They make logical decisions that are very unrepresentative of how we consider the people of the past. So that's why you should really take people's ingenuity into account, because humans are they're very good at turning everything that they see, especially in terms of warfare. They turn everything into weapons. And humans are incredibly creative with how they can. I know I keep on saying they, as in I'm not a human, but I swear I am. But that's all you have to think about when you're creating your own world, is you want to make sure that everybody who lives in it actually lives in it and thinks about it from their perspective. Because the thing that a lot of people make the mistake of doing is make everybody live as if they've lived in our world forever, and then just randomly put the magic in there and act as if the magic hadn't been there for a while. Because the only game I could say that was, or only thing I can think of that implements that well, is Shadowrun. If you don't know, it's a tabletop role playing game, and there's an aspect of world building. They've stolen a lot from Cyberpunk, but one of the big things that they did is they included magic in their world as well. And all you can think of is, oh wait, the world's trajectory has been so exactly the same as our normal human trajectory. There's no way that you could have magic exist. But the way Shadowrun explains it is that there was a rift that opened up, and essentially only Native Americans were tapping into it later in the future, of course. And that's what created this divide between magic and technology, is that only recently magic had been introduced into the world. So now you have a lot of people who have been ingrained in technology that can't access magic, because in Shadowrun, if you have more mechanical implants, you can't use magic. So there's that I can say, despite the game's many flaws with its system, the world building's not too bad when it comes to adding magic later in human history.
Thing of trying to find,
and that's the problem that I have with Marvel right now, is they're adding a bunch of magic later into human history, or retroactively saying that there was magic, because you have a character like Shang-Chi's dad, who has been an immortal. We don't know why he's an immortal, we just know he's an immortal. And can you imagine how history would have changed if we had an immortal running around?
Creative exploits for even the most dangerous aspects of their surroundings. Bethesda did the antithesis of what Kojima did. I may have miscounted, but Skyrim has 100 magic spells. 100! That is an insane quantity of magic. Most fantasy novels I read have like 1 or 2 magic systems, but like 100? Don't get me wrong, they're fun to use.
Okay, so the thing is with saying that it has 100 spells, so if he ends up saying that there's a magic system for each spell, that isn't true. Because you have to distribute them to very similar magic. So in my world, in the world that I'm creating, I have barrier magic, right? And you can make any barrier you want. It's just limited by your calorie intake as well as your imagination. So you have a limit on how big you can make it and how intricately detailed you can make it based on your calorie intake as well as your brain's ability to make imagery, right? Because everybody has different levels of imagery in their brain or recreating sounds in their mind. So I forget where I was going with this, but despite having so many ways you can use your barriers, there's nothing in there that says that they're completely different spells. But in Skyrim, they have a bunch of different spells. Like I said, with the elemental magics, each type of element that they can use, like ice, fire, and lightning, are completely separate, but they're used in similar ways. So that's what I would say about my world is you have, with the barrier magic, you have so many ways you can use it, but they're all limited in a similar way. That's what I could say about Skyrim, that if he tries to say that there are also 100 magic systems, that's a problem. Because I wouldn't consider spells that are closely related different magic systems unless their applications would change how you could use the magic.
But it seems like Bethesda's whole approach to that game's world wasn't to make a world so carefully thought out that it gives player full license to immerse themselves, to feel the nip of the brisk air on their skin as they climb the mountains, or smell the warm spices of the bustling marketplace under the midday sun. Bethesda's method was to add one cool feature, then move on and add another cool feature, then another, then repeat a few thousand times, filling the world with a huge quantity of world building, all the while neglecting the effects those things would have on an actually real world.
So that's something I will say is I just looking at all these characters, I realized that all of these characters have enchanted armor. Is enchanting really that hard? Why aren't there master enchanters running around ruining everybody's day by running around with like super armor and just destroying everybody? Because even a lot of the legendary weapons from Daedric gods and stuff have worse enchantments than what you can make physically by yourself. So there's an issue with enchantment as well. I don't think he's taking into account enchantment.
As cliche as it sounds,
because that technically is a magic system of itself. You're imbuing your armor with special abilities.
With Skyrim, Bethesda made their world as wide as an ocean, but as deep as a puddle. And for those of you out there who are avid...
Okay, so I said at the beginning that I don't mind the way the closer look talks, but just listen to this line again, and he adds some weird pauses.
Wide as an ocean, but as deep as a puddle.
But as deep as a puddle. There's no reason to say it like that. You have the pause before the but, because it's a comma. But there's no literary reason to say deep as a puddle. As deep as a puddle. No, yeah, there's no pause that I can think of that would actually make it sound as profound as he's trying to make it sound. Okay, well, let's continue. I don't want to get on my own case about the closer look's way of speaking. He does this in every video, so if you get tired of this, you probably won't want to watch his other stuff. But I think he has quite a bit good to say. He has points here and there that aren't the best. But with this video, I wanted to cover it just because I can use this as something to make my own content. I can talk about it in my own way as well as adapters. I'm missing something. Okay, I'm missing something that was on my desk beforehand, and now I'm upset. Is it here? No. Okay. We'll just deal with the loss of another guitar pick. They're everywhere in this house. Well, what I was saying is I wanted to essentially make our own magic system for fun, based on a lot of the parameters that he sets here,
who are avid fantasy readers, I'm sure,
and let him explain it better than I could explain it in a live format. Because I would probably have to write a script and then read off of it, which would be kind of lame.
sure you've heard of the author Brandon Sanderson. He's incredibly prolific, writes some fantastic books, and really is the person to pay attention to if you want.
Yeah, a lot of the writer channels that I know about all respect Brandon Sanderson a lot. I haven't read any of his books yet. Apparently he has a movie that's coming out in a couple of years. Just like a movie based on this book. So there's a lot that I don't know, but I know that he has quite a few videos. If you want to check Brandon Sanderson's videos out, he has a bunch of free education videos on hard versus soft magic systems. He has how to write compelling characters, all this crazy stuff, and it's all free on YouTube. And it's not like Audible, where you can, or what is it, Audible, or is it Skillshare? A lot of people say Skillshare is all free, but you have to sign up, so that's something. But if you're looking for truly free advice on how to write characters and stuff, oh, I dropped the pick. Where'd it go? Oh, there. But if you want truly free advice, just look up Brandon Sanderson. Well, actually, we're gonna duplicate this.
When I first played...
No. Brandon Sanderson. Yeah, these ones. He has a bunch of lectures. We got an introduction, writing science fiction and fantasy. Oh, he has more. So his introduction, he has characters. He has all these great videos that I haven't watched because I've been watching a bunch of other videos that do the same thing. But eventually I will want to watch this when I'm further along in my writing process, because I don't want to just spend all my time preparing, because that's what I've been doing for the past 3 years with my story. So I'm going to be writing and then taking a look at his stuff. But take a look at Brandon Sanderson's stuff. He's a very efficient writer. Really good at what he does.
Want to learn how to world build, especially when you want to create a really interesting magic system. If you haven't watched Sanderson's creative writing lectures on YouTube, and you have even like the faintest interest in writing, you are seriously missing out. Like for your own sake, go watch them like right after seeing this video. It's free on YouTube, and I have learned so much from his lectures. But a while ago, Sanderson created 3 laws to consider.
So essentially what I just said right there is what he just said right there. I forgot about this part of the video.
When creating a magic system, and when it comes to his 3rd law, I found it quite interesting.
Sanderson's 3rd law. Go deeper into a magic instead of wider. This is the idea that a fewer number of things in a world building situation that are well explored will actually feel like a wider, cooler world than a large number of things explored very shallowly. Okay? It's the idea in Hollywood and in our own psychology that bigger is better. But bigger can have multiple different meanings. I find that a magic system that you have explored deeply in an interesting way is far superior to a large number of things. Can I make them opposed to each other? Can I make it so that they are tied to the economy, to the religion?
Yeah, that's something that I've been taking into account in my writing a lot. And I'm surprised that I just so happen to overlap with how Brandon Sanderson does this, because I've never written a story before. But the go deeper rather than wider is exactly what I've been talking about. when I was talking about the way you can use Skyrim's elemental magics. Because you could have developed engines a lot faster. You could have refrigerators already, or really well off societies because you can store food now. Or there's so many things that you can do with those magics that you're not taking into account, especially with drawbacks. Those are amazing. If you can have drawbacks to your magics, that's awesome. Because that's something that they do kind of with My Hero Academia, but it doesn't really go. It doesn't really pay off the way that you expect. Because there's one thing that they explain later. I don't think this is a spoiler, but you have the character Endeavor, who's a fire person, and apparently he's not immune to overheating his body. He's not immune to overheating. So when just like with your normal body, if you were to get way too hot, you're going to suffer some organ damage. And he warns himself during a fight and says, "Oh, if I go too hot, I'm going to overheat. But I must do this for the sake of the people that I'm protecting." So he does that, and then after it, there seems like there's no problem that he suffered from that. So that's why I wish that would have been done a little better. When you have a drawback to a magic, it's really important, because what I was thinking is, if you have an ice magic, imagine if you're actually pulling heat out of your body. Your body has to work harder to. So the way you're casting the magic is by. Wait, would you be pulling heat out of your body? No, you'd be pulling cooling out of your body. So you'd get overheated pretty quickly, right? And because there's an energy cost, there's a lot you can do. That's why it takes so much effort to think about, especially if you're thinking about biology. That's where I think I'm going a little too far with mine. I'm taking biology into account a lot in my own world when it comes to all the magics. Because one of the things that I've been having so much trouble with is coming up with the drawback for barrier magic, besides just using energy. Because every magic uses energy in my world, but each one has a specific drawback associated with it. Like one of them, you get sick and start throwing up, and then you can have permanent stomach damage or ulcers and stuff. One of the other ones is you can go completely deaf. Other one, you can lose all feeling in your body. So there's a lot of them, but then the barrier one is the only one I can't really think of what specific body part would have problems. The only one I could think of was skin damage, because it's thematic almost, because you're creating a barrier to keep yourself protected, and then if someone gets through that barrier, you're screwed. you get cut and you're easily gonna die. Yeah, I have been mulling around using blood as the issue, so it has less platelets. But yeah, we'll continue with what this has to say.
If I can tie these things all together.
But just to highlight, this is one of the greatest things you can go with. But if you go too far, you're going to stop yourself. You halt yourself in the writing process, which is what I've done for 3 years. So just know how far you need to go in order to feel satisfied. I'm a little bit of no, I'm not a little bit. I'm a lot of it a perfectionist. So that's why this is a little bit of a negative for me, but I still want to do it because I feel like it'll pay off.
To a couple of my magics, will I have a better experience for the reader? The answer is generally going to be yes. That's what's going to happen. Considering the ramifications of what you already have is worth doing instead of creating something new.
And here's the thing. None of this is to say that you can't.
Okay, because that's another thing. Since I've been talking about my story for 3 years, when I talk about it with people, they always suggest, "Oh, why don't you add this element or this element?" And I always say to them, "No, No, I can't do that because that's another magic system that I have to develop rules for, and that's too much. That's too much effort. I want to stick with what I already have. So that's something that I've been working with, is trying to limit what's possible, because I already have so many elements that I have to juggle constantly.
Have a tremendously wide world and have that world be immersive. There are many writers like Tolkien or George R.R. Martin who have done exactly that, but what this is to say is as you increase the scope of your world, that exponentially increases the amount of work you have to do if you want to make every aspect of...
See, that exactly what I just said right now. It exponentially increases the amount of work you have to do to make the world around it. It only works if it's a more recently introduced element of the world, because then the world doesn't have enough time to adapt to that new world presence.
your world actually interesting and not feel like a Skyrim magic spell where it's just a surface level thing. But as you add more elements to your world, like the butterfly effect of ramifications those impacts have on the culture and economy and religion, it just starts to get very crazy very quickly. So that's just something worth considering when you're trying to create your own world. But as a general rule, it's better to go deeper than wider. And
I didn't need to hear that. You gave me the whole a whole section of Brandon Sanderson's lecture.
I know that one of you guys is going to timestamp this and say in the comments, that's the title of my sex tape. Don't do it. You're better than that. But as long as you think things through and kind of like simulate in your head what would happen if this new element were introduced, as long as you do that, it will do wonders to make your world have a much stronger internal realism. And as a result, it will make it so much easier for your...
So if anybody has any suggestions in the comments, just come up with something that we can add to a world, and let's see how we can change it. So we'll be commenting on this throughout, but if you have any ideas to add to a world, just shoot one and we'll work with it in a document just to see what we can come up with as what would happen. What would be the ramifications of adding that to a world?
Audience to fall in love with your world. And I mean, the last thing you should do, the absolute last thing you should ever do, is introduce a spell to your world called Transmute Ore.
Yeah, I can see why there's an issue there, because a big part of our world has been obsession with money and riches, right? So imagine if you could just create gold. There's already a huge problem with that because it reduces the price, or it reduces the overall wealth that can be gained from owning a bar of gold. It's inflation to the highest degree.
Like, I have never in my life seen a more poorly executed magic system in like any fiction than the spell Transmute Ore in Skyrim. So for those of you unfamiliar with Skyrim, there's a spell called Transmute Ore. Using this, you can take a chunk of iron ore and turn it into an equal amount of gold ore with the low cost of a little bit of magicka. This spell has absolutely no lore around it. Like, I checked the wiki, I scoured the internet, like, out of the 820 in-world books in this game, none of them even, like, mention this magic system of turning iron into gold. Like, there are no...
Because it turns iron into silver and silver into gold. I think I don't remember which, because I think in real life we had the alchemic idea that we have the, what is it? It's the, I think it's the Philosopher's Stone, or it's the Alchemist Stone. It's something like that. Like there's a whole thing before Harry Potter, so don't think that I'm getting this from Harry Potter. And it's an idea that you, once you acquire this special alchemist stone, you can transform anything into gold if you want to. So that's where I think they got the idea, is they wanted to take alchemy, or our real life version of alchemy, because alchemy in this game is really just potion making, because we've finally adapted alchemy into potion making, but in real life, alchemy was truly just the goal of creating an elixir that would eventually create gold out of something that isn't gold.
No lines of dialogue where like a wizard tells you the history and impact of this spell on the world. Truly, the creators didn't spend a single second trying to integrate this magic into this world. They added it for no other reason than because it's a cool gimmick. But here's the problem, and like but the spell to create gold exists, and the world of Skyrim has a gold-based economy.
Mm-hmm.
Can I remind you that the currency everyone uses in Skyrim...
Okay, just to let you know, it's not gold, it's septum. They're called septum. So they're printed gold. They're not just gold. Just to let you know. But gold is worth a lot in that game. It's actually one of the most well worth it treasure items you can sell. So despite me saying, oh, it's not gold that they use for their currency, it's printed gold. But gold is still worth a lot in their world. So even if you didn't have access to a printer, you can sell it for quite a bit.
Are gold coins. That means that anyone who knows this spell can buy a ton of iron ore, turn it into a ton of gold ore, and all he then needs to do is create a somewhat halfway decent mold. And now he has the ability
there we go. The half decent mold.
To literally print money. Now, I won't flesh this point out because Bethesda didn't flesh their world out, so why should I do that with this video? But if just one person in this world had the ability to wave gold into existence, the effect it would have on a gold-based economy would look something like this. And this is why Death Stranding's world ensnared me. I mean, I'll go on a limb.
Yeah, so I can see his problem is he's just using that clear example of a gold-based economy being ruined by just someone being able to create it. And one thing that they could have done was just have their economy based off of different things like gems, because you can't create gems in that world. So it could have been based off of like rupees. I think they call them rubies in... I know they call them rupees in Legend of Zelda. So you could have had a rupee-based system where it's a bunch of large gems. That would be super easy fix.
And say this is my favourite fictional world I've ever seen depicted in a video game. Don't get me wrong, The Witcher 3, God of War and Mass Effect, all of those have brilliant worlds, but what I love about Death Stranding is the impressive discipline Hideo Kojima had when designing this world. He didn't do what so many amateur world builders do and go crazy. He didn't say, okay, now we're adding a new religion, now we're adding a new species, now we're adding a new economy based on rare metal, now we're adding 10 new magic systems with people.
Because if you add a new religion, it's usually... So that's something that I've been struggling with in my own world, is I've been trying to come up with a religion that wouldn't just be one of the ones that we already have. Especially since I'm basing my world off our own, but with some points in history changed. But I wanted it so that magic was always available to everybody. But because it costs so much energy, people didn't use it often until they gathered up into civilization where they had enough food to go around. So there's
people who can shoot fire from their hands, and also ice as well, because that's cool. And also let's throw in another religion, and also let's just throw in another magic system as well, for good measure. He only adds one or two elements, then painstakingly considers the ramifications those things would have if that world were actually real. And as a result, it is a highly...
See, I want to know if there's any other magic systems in Death Stranding, because I know Timefall's a thing, but what if there's other ones that we just don't know about?
Immersive world.
I want to know about that.
You know, unless you
consider
all that out of nowhere.
I've realized I've been playing it way too loud.
But people give Kojima a bad rap for shilling out to advertisers. At the end of the day, I sympathise with him because he's just an influencer selling out his dignity to try and pay his bills. Speaking of which, Rage... Just kidding, they haven't sponsored this. A man's got to have some standards. But this video isn't sponsored by Rage, but it is sponsored
by Skillshare?
Me? That was so cringe. But basically, I just want to mention that if you guys are longtime fans of this channel and you want to see me make more of these kind of videos, it really would mean the world to me if you could support me on Patreon.
Okay, let's go through it just to let him advertise himself.
Videos like this, that's only possible because of you guys out there who are already supporting me on Patreon, as you give me so much more stability with my channel, and it allows me to have that creative freedom. And it's to those people who are already supporting me, thank you so much. I bloody love you guys, because you are helping me live my dream and helping me just have fun.
See, now I'm feeling bad because I've never donated to anybody on Patreon.
With this channel, because I can take experiments like this and see what happens. If you click that link in the description and support me, you will find a ton of cool rewards. You get access to my Patreon exclusive Discord server, and we've got our own exclusive little community going on. You can watch all of my videos 5 days early. You can get your name credited in the description.
See, that's something that I've never understood about Patreon, is how all the people who say, oh, you get it 5 days early. Not the best incentive, honestly, but it's fine. I can understand why people would do that.
At the highest tier,
they want some exclusive privilege for the people in their Patreon, so they feel like they're given something to them.
I have a little consultation session where I'll take a look at your YouTube channel or read a little bit of your novel or anything in between.
What'd you say?
Where I'll can get your name credited in the description. And at the highest tier, I have a little consultation session where I'll take a look at your YouTube channel or read a little bit of your novel or anything in between and tell you what I think you can do to improve your craft. But by far the most important reason why you should support me on Patreon is because I have to worry less about shilling out to Raid Shadow Legends. Guys, this is blackmail. This is a stick-up. You don't support me on Patreon, and
I enjoy this type of content where when they do an advertisement, they make a joke out of it. Because I love when people make fun of Raid Shadow Legends.
I'm going to do a Raid Shadow Legends brand deal. I'm warning you, none of us want to see it. I don't want to see it, but I'll do it if you don't pledge. Unless you click that link right now and support me, I'll do it. I promise, as long as you guys support me on Patreon.
That seemed very out of character for him, that laugh there. Wait, listen to
this. This is blackmail. This is a stick-up. You don't support me on Patreon. If you don't pledge, unless you click that link right now and support me, I'll do it.
Sounds like a sound that an anime character would make when they're about to fight somebody who they think is weaker than them. Oops. Boop.
Promise, as long as you guys support me on Patreon, I will never shell out to Raid Shadow Legends. I think if I was only supported by one person who gave like $1, probably still wouldn't shell out to them. I mean, I think if I was like starving on the street, homeless, I'd still probably wouldn't shell out to them. But anyway, back to it. Just because you're adding in fantastical elements like magic systems or rain that speeds up time, that is no excuse for being lazy. The reason why I say that is because I very much imagine there are people in the comments who are making the argument, but it's a fantasy. It's not supposed to be realistic. You're fine with having people shoot fire.
Okay, that's a big thing that a lot of people end up saying, is that just because one element is fantastical means that everything doesn't make sense. Doesn't need to make sense, but that's something that gets rid of that's something that I think he's going to explain it, but if you don't have rules, you don't have stakes. Like that's a huge thing with storytelling. If you don't have rules at all to what will logically happen, you don't have stakes because you don't know what's ever going to happen. So it's just randomly surprising every single time. Like one big thing that I'll mention is in the Black Widow movie, I have some real problems with how durable Black Widow is. Because Black Widow is supposed to be a normal person in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. She's a normal person with a lot of training, of course, but she's a normal person nonetheless. She has a human body. And there's a distinct scene that everybody likes to make fun of, where she falls from several stories, lands on a bunch of things on the way down, and then lands on her feet when she gets to the bottom. And then, just to emulate an earlier scene, or just to bring up an earlier scene in a different movie, we have, I think it's the Winter Soldier, when he gets blasted out of the elevator, gets hit against a wall and falls. So the big difference with saying that that's okay for Steve and not for Black Widow is Steve Rogers, Captain America, is a super soldier. He's supposed to be more durable. And he still falls on the floor when he lands because he feels pain still. But Black Widow, she falls several stories, doesn't break a single bone, and lands on her feet, and then continues to run in the next scene. It's unbelievable, because then you don't know what's going to kill her, if anything. Because then you look at Endgame when she dies. Sorry for the spoiler. If you haven't seen that, it's on you, not on me. But when she dies in Endgame from falling off a cliff, it's laughable because you have a similar fall. I don't know how long the fall in the Endgame scene is, but she's falling from a large height. And all you can say to that is, wow, she fell and died in this one scene, and she fell from pretty high and hit really hard metal things on the way down and didn't even break a single bone. That would have been a great way to humanize her, is if she fell on the floor and damaged herself. But in this way, it just makes it so that she's a human character with superhuman abilities that is never described as such. So it just gets rid of a lot of the tenseness of situations. So irritating. Yeah, that's something that that was just one of my biggest gripes with that movie, but it's mostly the fact that they take a bunch of human characters and make them more durable than they should be, honestly. But that brings me back to the point of this, where he's saying, "Oh, just because it has one fantastical element doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that it's important to have any rules, right?" A lot of situations are enhanced by rules. You can say, "Oh, I can't use this magic in this certain way unless I believe in myself." That's a rule. No matter how soft of a magic rule that is. But when the character finally believes themselves at the end and uses their magic in a better way, a lot of people start to cheer, because it's a triumphant moment, because they took into account a rule that they said earlier in the movie or the story, and they utilize it to have a payoff. There are no payoffs without stakes, and there are no stakes without rules. So that's oh, come on, man. Makes me irritated. Okay, let's go.
From their hands and rain that speeds up time, but you're not fine with a little oversight in the security of a prison? Yes, I'm not fine with it, and neither should you be. The argument that it's okay for your world to not make logical sense because it's a fantasy is flagrantly flawed. In a certain way, fantasy is identical to science fiction, in that the world establishes rules to which it adheres to, and when a writer explores his world, he must stick to those rules.
Well, technically, if you have science fiction, that is a magic system. No matter how weird we make it out to be, it's a magic. Or no matter how weird that sounds to have technology be considered a magic, but it is. Any technology that we do not currently possess is a magic. And the more rules we have for it, the easier it is to define what the payoffs would be in a certain story.
If you're writing a hard science fiction, the rules of your world will be identical to our own. And if you don't stick to them, it will obliterate the believability of your world. If you're writing a fantasy where magic is a common thing, and you fail to consider something as simple as what magical security will look like in a world filled with magic, it will shatter audience immersion because it makes no sense.
Because I think it's less about immersion and just more about story plots. Because the whole prison breakout thing is supposed to be like you have to build yourself up and get some rapport within the prison, and get some weapons and break yourself out and stuff like that. But then with magic, you just skip all of that. It's not even about immersion at that point. It's about the satisfaction of the story being told. If you don't have any of that, the element that you don't, if you don't account for the elements that would ruin the story you're trying to tell, it makes the story so much harder to work with, especially as someone who might, because in video games you have a choice. So with my first ever playthrough, I was a bow sword or a bow hammer shield user. So I had a hard time in that fight because I had no experience with daggers or sword attacks. So when you finally get the shiv to attack people, it doesn't do that much damage. So that's what you need to take into account, is the fact that if you have any problems with your story, if you have any problems in your world building, you can demolish the payoffs that you want to happen. Because that's the biggest thing, is I have a few payoffs in my story that I've wanted to make happen. That I started with. Like, my premise was I wanted to have barrier magic in the world because I like barriers and I want the main character to use them. And then the other one is a secret. I will never say it until the story comes out. But overall, you have a payoff that you are building towards, and you can build around that as long as it makes sense. But if you end up writing the story and it doesn't seem like that payoff is going to come from the story you've written, you either have to rewrite your story or just change the payoff that you've wanted from the beginning, which will suck because you've been putting all the effort into trying to make that payoff happen. But now you have to, but still you would have a satisfying story at that point. You'd have a story that builds up to a different payoff because it builds up better that way. Because one thing that I've been having a hard time with is what would be the story that I'm trying to tell? What would be the journey that the main character would go through in the first story? And the closest thing I can develop to like a lesson they learned is what does honor mean to you? Because that's something that I think a lot of people wrestle with nowadays. We talked about it in the Hassan thing, is taking pride in your work. That's something where you take pride in what you can accomplish and what you are capable of. But do you do that at the detriment of other people? So that's the thing that I would want to tackle within my story. But a lot of the story beats that I have set up don't really work towards that. So I'm trying to figure out either what story I could tell with that, or using that, what does honor mean to you, or it's like what things I have to change within my story to get to that what does honor mean to you story, or change what I'm working towards and see if I can find something that fits the story that I already have written in my head. Super difficult, but it's well worth it when you finally get it right. And that's where a lot of stories go wrong nowadays, is the lesson they're trying to tell isn't coherent with the story that they're telling. Because one thing that a lot of people mention is I'll use The Last Jedi to happen because it's fun to beat a horse while it's fun to beat that dead horse. But in The Last Jedi, you have Yoda explicitly say, "Oh, failure's the best teacher." But then you have a lot of characters within the story that didn't fail by their own merits. They failed because of bad luck. Or you have a character that explicitly didn't fail, but is made to seem like they failed. You have a character like Poe, who saved the entire resistance in the opening scene, but is demoted and slapped for it because some people died during it. But that's war; it's going to happen. And then you have have the whole secondary plot line with Finn and Rose. You have them fail because they just happen to be, their BB unit happened to be seen by an evil BB unit. It's the big problem with all of this, is that you have all these failures that they've been trying to set up throughout the movie to hit home that Yoda line of failure, failure too, because failure is the best teacher. It's such a horrible thing, such a horrible way of driving that point home if none of the points within the movie match. And that's why I want my story to match with its point. And obviously I won't have everything working towards that point because I want certain spectacle to be available. But it doesn't mean that my story still can't have coherence in its story and its characters. Because even without a strong world, you can still have strong characters. You can still have strong characters that act within reason, within how you understand the character to be. Because imagine if you had a character that was the most altruistic person ever, and then they just randomly kill somebody, and that just seems like a total betrayal of their character. But what you can do is have an altruistic character who is challenged in a way that makes it so they have to make a decision to kill somebody, or other people who are innocent also die. So it's that type of thing. You want to test people's morals in stories. You want to make a character seem like they have a principle that they live by. I don't know where this gets away from magic. I don't know why I'm going so far away from magic, but let's continue. As soon as we get to the end of the story, I'm going to take a bathroom break, or maybe I might go to the bathroom right now, but let's see what else he has to say here.
Skimp out on internal realism, and your audience will see how that guy in the back of the shot is actually a cardboard cutout because it just fell down. And they will see how that gun the guy is holding is actually a prop. They'll notice how that maiden behind the bar isn't an interesting living person, they're just a character. Break the rules of your world, and they will receive a stark reminder that your fictional world is nothing more than a construct, and
that's something that I feel like is very, very true. If you have rules that you've been abiding by but you've never said until a certain point, and then they just randomly pull something out, it makes it a really unsatisfying ending. And I think that's what a lot of people will say about the Avatar: The Last Airbender series, is how his whole dilemma in the last 4 episodes is he doesn't want to kill his enemy because he is a monk who has revered all life. And anytime he's actually accidentally killed somebody while he's been in a uncontrollable state, he's felt so much remorse for it. But then at the end, they just introduce an element that allows him to get away with not killing his enemy and getting rid of the threat that they are, which can be unsatisfying. But it's just so for me, I still love that series, but I can say that part is a little unsatisfying because I'd rather them, if they really wanted to be sadistic about it, they could have just crippled the Fire Lord. But what they do is they cripple his power. They get rid of all of his firepower, which is, it feels like a cop-out. So, but that makes it so that the story seems a lot less like a thing that would happen if the rules were set the way they are. It seems more like something that someone wrote, which is where the issue lies. Where if you have something that just seems like it was written rather than a story, that's where you have the problems, and I can understand where Closer Look is coming from there. Let me see my phone. Give me a second. Okay,
poorly constructed one at that. But right now, I think what would be really cool is if I stop talking about the theory and give you an example of what it looks like when you put this into action. It's time to do Bethesda's job for them. They've added so many magic systems to this game, and
okay, let's continue.
One of Skyrim's magic spells, like just one.
Okay, so right before he starts this section, because I have a lot to say about this section, I remember it. I will be right back because I have to go to the bathroom really badly. Sorry, mate. I had to take a dump. It wasn't just a pee. Sorry. Okay. Let me see if everything's still running properly. Okay. Get back to.
And we'll ask, how would it affect Skyrim if that world truly were a real place? So in Skyrim, there's a spell the player can learn called Bound Sword. Essentially, once you learn the spell, you can, with an extremely low magicka cost, summon a blade that in the game is as effective as a real sword. Its stats are pretty strong, and while there are clearly more effective weapons in this world, it's certainly a lot more effective than the standard steel sword. So how does this affect the world in the game as it stands? Well, of course, we already know the answer to that.
So the thing is with that spell is it's rare to see anybody even use that spell. Because just because it exists within the world doesn't mean that it necessarily that everybody has access to it, because that's a major element in my story, is that everybody has access to the magic system that I placed. So in this case, you don't necessarily know how many people have access to this bound sword spell. We just know the only other people that use the bound sword spell are the Thalmor. And they're just the Thalmor guards, just not even normal Thalmor citizens. So it's not to say that everything he says here is wrong. If it truly was their intention that anybody could use the bound sword spell, that's a major problem. Because as you can see here,
Transmute, all the magic was added because it's a fun gimmick, and its impact on the world was completely neglected by the developers. In the game Skyrim, the only instance I've seen where this spell was even like slightly fleshed out is the fact that some Thalmor soldiers you come across use it,
there we go.
and that's it. You come across the very rare person in this world who uses this spell. Now, I imagine a few of you are thinking, so what? A magic sword that people can summon. That's going to have almost zero impact on this world, if any. I mean, steel swords still work, right? They still function and cut things, so people will keep using them. The only ramifications this would have in a realistic Skyrim
Oh my God,
is a
just
couple of
sneezing.
bandits and wizards use the spell in combat.
So in that, just thinking about that, all I can say is if canonically it's only the Dragonborn character that can learn all these spells instantly, because we pick up the book and then we click on it and we immediately learn the spell. If it took a great deal of time to learn that spell, it would change a lot, because they did this in Onward too, where there's magic that exists but it's really difficult to learn, so a lot of people just went towards technology instead, which I can understand because technology is a lot simpler. It's exactly the same concept of bowmen being really, really effective, right? Because you have so much you can do, but it takes so many years to build up the proficiency with a bow to the extent that you can use it in a war scenario. But with a crossbow, you could just hand someone a crossbow and say, pull that trigger, and then when you want to pull the string back, you just use this pulley system. It's exactly what technology does to itself. So just, if you have something that's easier to do, there's already that you could use as the limiter of the spell. So it's not only that it would just changing it so that the magic is just only canonically you learn a spell over a long period of time. It's just a gameplay mechanic that you can learn it instantly. That would fix a lot of the issues that the Closer Look has with this, especially with the books being so rare, because once you use the book, it's gone forever for some reason. Because if that was also canonical, that would be great. It would be a great limiter in this aspect. Because Transmute Sword, if it was so difficult, but you could still do it, I think it would probably make blacksmiths have more incentive to make their weapons cheaper, so that less people are willing to take the time to learn conjured weapons. Because conjured weapons, yeah, it's going to take a lot of time, but they're free. But what if you make it so the ease of access for normal weapons is so if you have more ease of access of that being cheaper, if you have more ease of access for an item, you're going to choose that most often. But as it stands, as we know the mechanics, like based on the mechanics of Skyrim, the game that you're playing, you learn conjured sword immediately, or bound sword. You learn the bound sword spell immediately as you pick up the book, and you can use it as many times as you want, create a weapon that you can use in combat. which is fundamentally broken, because we'll see here.
That's it, right? Wrong. Like Christ, that's so wrong. In Skyrim, it's labelled a novice level spell, which is the lowest tier of spell that exists. Now, I'm sure there's some extremely obscure book you can read in one of the earlier Elder Scrolls games from 2002 saying that lore-wise this is a very difficult spell to cast. But this game has the Bound Sword spell labelled as novice, and by this game's own logic, because it's the lowest difficulty spell, and it seems that every humanoid in this world can learn magic, that logically means that anyone in this...
But that's under the assumption that every humanoid can learn magic, when that's not necessarily the case. We don't know that for sure. That's just our assumption based on our character can be literally anybody. You can make any looking Nord, orc, like any species, any race, any combination of features. You can make it any character you want and they can learn the spell. But that's the only evidence that we have for that, for us being able to, for anybody being able to use a spell, because we only see very specific people use spells, and they're usually royalty. We don't see any poor people using spells or any just basic guards using spells. We see Thalmor guards because they are not basic guards, they are high elf guards. So they're obviously trained in a certain way.
World with a little determination can learn how to use this spell. If you took Skyrim as it is in the game and ran it like a simulation with a working economy and society, the effect the bound blade would have on the economy would be colossal. The first effect we would see, the blacksmiths would go out of business, because...
Well, they wouldn't go out of business because you could still make armor, man. You can make armor out of metals. There's no bound armor spell. Yeah, you wouldn't be hired by the military to make weapons for all your soldiers, but you could still be hired by the military for armor purposes, because you can make, because yes, in real life what we had were guilds. What guilds were essentially merchant monopolies, where they would designate what certain people would do. So you could have a blacksmith that was specifically for buttons. They were really good at making click-on button. I don't know if click-on buttons were a thing back then, but you just have very specific things that they were good at. You could have someone that was really good at making breastplates. They have really finely crafted breastplates that could be customized to someone's body shape. Or you could have someone that was really good at making specifically a specific type of weapon, like you only make maces or you only make swords. But that's why there would be so many. That's why there was a place for every blacksmith, because they would specialize in something. It's not because we have the misconception that blacksmiths do anything, but it's not like they do anything and get paid equally for each thing. Every person has their own specialty. You have your own specialty when it comes to an aspect of the work that you do. Because we could say, oh, maybe the story writer, they're a really good world builder, but their characters are lacking. There's so many things that you can work on when you're making art, or any craft that you do. You could say that you're someone who makes origami, and you could say, oh, well, maybe that they don't make this type of origami very well, but they make other ones perfect. So everybody specializes. So just saying that flat out every blacksmith would go out of business, no. It's the ones that specialize in specifically swords that would go out of business. And the thing is, in real life, if you're in a military situation, no one mainly goes for the sword. Because if you want to look at any video that Shadiversity has talked about with military in the medieval era, swords are a last-ditch effort usually. They're a backup weapon. You use a war weapon because you're not running around with the battlefield, or you're not running around the country and then fighting randomly. You are going to a battlefield to fight because you know you will fight. So you bring a weapon that is devastating, like this mace back here. This mace would be in real life a lot more devastating than this sword. Because this is a weapon of war that's really heavy and you can't really travel around a lot with it. But when you're in a military situation, you don't have to travel. All you have to do is fight. So it's people who would specialize in specifically swords that would have a problem. Or axes, because I think there's also a bound axe spell, but that's an expert level spell. I don't know where their issue is. But if you're just looking at bound sword, only blacksmiths in the guild that specialize in swords would get fired and have to work on something else. But even then, if their weapons were truly that good because they specialize in swords, they would still be coveted because they're an infinitely lasting sword, or not infinitely, but more indefinite than a conjured sword. Because when you conjure the sword, it only lasts a minute, I think he says.
Learn magic, lowest difficulty.
Where is it? 120 seconds. So it's 2 minutes. So you have a 2-minute long lasting sword. As opposed to a sword that you just have access to at all times. What if you're running low on your mana? You can't cast your weapon, you're defenseless. Oh no. There's still uses for things. I think the closer look is going too far into it. Because he's not thinking about how society worked. I guess in the society of Skyrim, because they only have one blacksmith per town, if that one blacksmith specialized in swords, they'd be struggling to make ends meet. But all of these blacksmiths make armor, shields, and weapons. They don't just make swords.
Blacksmiths would go out of business because, of course, they would.
So this is where I say, like, Closer Look makes a lot of good points in a lot of his videos, but then he usually drops the ball by the end because he makes a statement that's too absolute and doesn't really look at the intricacies.
It would be inevitable that the existence of these swords would cause a dramatic decrease in income for blacksmiths everywhere, because now almost every soldier, almost every last person who would ever have need of a sword in their life would ditch the steel and pick up the magic one, because it's a total upgrade in almost every way, with the one exception of the fact that it's a bit of a time investment to learn how to use it. Now, I'm no...
You can't say that it's the one drawback, because if it's for someone who just wants to have a weapon at all times, that's effective, especially because it takes time to cast. Because I know that if you ever look at things like World of Warcraft, a lot of things that you do as a gameplay mechanic aren't that way within the world. So stuff like traveling across what's it called? Silver what? Wow. Silver Pine Forest. Yep, okay. So traveling across Silver Pine Forest in game time takes like 5 minutes maybe on foot. Not too long. In books describing everything, you have it take weeks. So games aren't the end all be all of, like, the gameplay mechanic isn't the end all be all of the world building. So just because, oh god, just because you can cast the spell quickly in game doesn't mean that it's necessarily in lore that you can do that. Because everybody in World of Warcraft casts spells pretty quickly, but I can assure you, in a lot of cinematics, the spells take a lot longer to cast.
Shadiversity. I know bugger all about how swords actually work, but I can guess that in medieval times they were bloody expensive. To get a blacksmith to make a sword for you must take a great deal of time.
Well, okay. I'd say that they're likely very expensive if they were well-made swords. You could make a pretty crude sword pretty quickly, even on your own without access to blacksmithing. Because you could just take a random piece of metal and then use a rock to shave it down. Maybe. I don't know the extent to which you could do that, but you could make a pretty rudimentary weapon out of random pieces of metal you find, or steel.
From their part, it would cost you a fair pocketful of money. And once you have it, you have to spend more time and money maintaining it. You have to sharpen it and clean it.
Okay, true. You do have to sharpen and maintain your weapon, which is a big time consumer. So I can see why bound sword would be very good in that aspect, but if you want to really sorry, I'm just fumbling on my words. I don't know what to say. All I can say is it's there are positives and drawbacks to both. It's not like all blacksmiths would go out of business, and especially because of what I've mentioned with war weapons are not swords usually.
And make sure it doesn't rust. You need to worry about losing it because it's an expensive piece of kit.
Weapons, swords usually don't rust if you keep them in a locked scabbard, because that's what scabbard locks are for. That's specifically what they were invented for, was so that rainwater didn't get inside them and then sit on the blade and rust it.
To worry about it being stolen. But now, who in the world...
Okay, true. Never having to worry about it being stolen, big plus. Big plus.
To use
if you had a conjured sword.
Steel sword, when this far cooler magic one is not only free, but it's also incredibly lightweight and only exists when you want it to, as you can summon it on a whim. Now, as a soldier, you don't need to worry about lugging this cumbersome sword on your belt at all times.
Cumbersome? Really? Soldiers, they lug much bigger weapons over their shoulder, or they did in real life. You look at any medieval painting and or any medieval battle painting, and you have huge weapons on these guys. It's not like you're conjuring a war glaive or a war scythe or a Bec de Corbin or a hammer. Or there's so many weapons that are just so much better than the sword when it comes to a battleground setting. So it's just weird for him to focus so much on the sword, because we all know that in real life, for everybody to be doing sword and board would not be very common. It would actually be sword and shield, or sorry, no, not sword and board. It would be spear and board. So board being shield. Spear and shield is one of the most devastating combos in history. It's so effective. So if we were seeing actual soldiers, that's just a problem of they don't have spears in Skyrim. So they just gave them the next best thing, which would be a sword that can stab past a shield. But I think there's a lot more to the world building that's wrong before bound swords. That makes bound swords worse. Because you could fix some other parts of it and make it so bound swords aren't that ridiculous to exist and not be dominating weaponry.
You can just twiddle your fingers and summon this blade on command. If Skyrim were a real world, all of the Jarls and Generals would want to save money anywhere they can, because of course they would. Any king or government only has a finite amount of resources, and by teaching every last soldier in the army, or...
No, I could understand every soldier in the army learning that, so for their backup weapon. For random people just walking around and who don't have access to learning that spell, that's an issue. Because then you you definitely have a market for people who need those normal weapons, is because they don't have access to learning that spell. Because what he's not also not realizing is, if that spell existed and it could save money, a Jarl would also monopolize, or royalty would try to monopolize the learning of that spell so they can still make money. Or guilds would never let that happen. That's a big thing of that. That's the reason why guilds are such a huge thing in real medieval eras, because they would regulate how the market works. That's the problem with today's economy. We don't have guilds anymore. I want old-fashioned guilds again. So we'll see.
Every last guard in their town to use the bound sword spell.
Yeah, but like I said, every guard in a town, every soldier would have a bound weapon as a backup weapon. They would have a warlike weapon that they carry around with them when they're on a warpath. But if they're walking around as a guard, I can understand. Even though there's plenty of the because you can let me look up medieval guard painting. Of the era. You got this type of stuff. They have a sword backup weapon, and they have a giant polearm. Everybody who's a guard is always depicted as having. This is a bardiche. Where is it? We got huge weapons all over the place. Let's try to find any period pieces. A lot of these are we got this random guy with is that a poleaxe? It's a poleaxe. You see what I mean, though, is that it's not all about the sword. Yes, the sword would become a dying breed within soldier communities because you have the royalty forcing everybody to learn it. But it doesn't mean that they would also, because if you add the bound axe into the mix, and it's an expert spell, I think. Wait, let me see. Skyrim bound battle axe, right? Yeah, you can make a bound battle axe, which is the bigger deal in this situation. But even then, battle axes aren't the most well-rounded weapon. So even then, you'd still have a portion of your army that uses bound battle axes, but the rest would be using other specialized weapons. But I feel like Closer Look is taking it too literally, as in looking deeper he's looking deeper within bound sword, but not realizing that the world is less extreme than he makes it out to be.
It would save them an absolute fortune in equipment costs, as they would never have to buy their soldiers a weapon ever again. Also,
No, they wouldn't have to buy them a backup weapon ever again, which is, yeah, that's a big deal, but plenty of people who don't have access to that spell would still need swords.
So, to this bound sword existing, we would see an impact on more than the economy. It would impact culture as well. We would see weapon purists. In Whiterun, there's a renowned club of warriors.
Okay, yeah, culture. That's a big thing that I took into account with my world, because I have the whole magic system. And one thing that I thought of was that there was a section of purists who refuse to use magic and have developed ways of countering magic without using magic, so that they can hold their own in a fight against a magic user. I'm still trying to come up with what those countermeasures would be, but one of the big ones, because I also have fire magic, is one of the big things would have to be like extendable shields, maybe, because if someone's blasting fire at you and you're trying to stay behind your shield, they could just aim at your feet. You really do need some way to protect yourself from the fire. Or you could even have like fire resistant clothing. That would be very helpful for that. Especially because the way I have fire magic being able to be used is you can control where it's going, but the farther away it is from you, the more energy it requires. So it's not recommended that you would curve around someone's shield because that's so energy intensive. And then otherwise you just shoot a blast at somebody and let gravity take it. Um, yeah, that's all I can say is there's the idea of purists is a really neat idea in any story that has a magic system. So someone that refuses to use that magic system is really interesting because it always sounds like me when it comes to the meta of video games. I refuse to play the meta.
Warriors called the Companions, which is where the best fighters go to seek glory. It would make total sense if these hardcore warriors have a strict no-bound weapons policy, but like when you speak to their leader, he says a real warrior uses real steel, and they refuse to let you in, so you throw away all that magic crap and buy a real sword.
Well, or you could have a more a better you could have a better lore explanation and have someone say that bound weapons penetrate werewolf skin because the companions are werewolves. There could be other implications in that would be very cool in that world building because he's just going surface level with the purist thing. There could be more underlying reasons why they're purists rather than just being stubborn. Because that's what I'll say is there's probably more underlying reasons why certain people are purists when it comes to certain things rather than just being stubborn. Although when I look at the Melee community, Super Smash Bros. Melee, that's all I can see is stubbornness, refusal to acknowledge any other Smash game as decent. Although I will say they do acknowledge that the reason that they like Melee the most is movement mechanics. So it's not stubbornness; it's preference. So I will concede on that point.
And these companions would be proud about the fact that they use real steel while no one else does. They'll boast about it and cry it out when in combat about how they've done what nobody else does anymore and they use actual metal weapons because they're just that hardcore. And
not metal weapons, it's just a sword.
The spellbound bow also exists in this game. So everything I said that applies to blacksmiths, that also applies to bowyers and fletchers too, because who wants to pay money for arrows when you can have an infinite supply of free ones just by waving your hand? Now poor old Elendra, who owns the Drunken Huntsman, is joining the blacksmith in the bar, trying to drink away the pain because no one's buying his bows and arrows anymore, and he's on the brink of going out of business.
Yeah, it's another situation of him equating it too easily because bound bow is pretty hard to learn. And I assure you, there are better bows and better weapons in the world. They're just a lot more expensive, so that's probably why it would be harder for blacksmiths to get by. Is that only rich people would be able to buy them, but the rich people are already paying mages to teach all of their soldiers how to use bound weapons.
And I appreciate that some details are too small to fully flesh out. Worldbuilder's disease does exist, and it's totally possible to spend too much time fleshing out your world. I appreciate
that's where it is. It's not world builder's disease. It's perfectionism. You're taking too much time into the world building and not spending any time on story.
That world building for a massive world like Skyrim's is a demanding task, and maybe that excuses forgetting about one or two knock-on effects if these elements were real. But seriously, all of them? Every single logical ramification that would occur if the Bound Sword were a real spell. You forgot about every last one? Like, you couldn't even have a single line of dialogue where a blacksmith grumbles about all those magic swords out there and how they're inferior to real steel. How hard would it have been to add, like, an NPC in the bar who was a former blacksmith, and, like, you talk to him and he goes on this diatribe on how he's lost his whole income because of those
But He's not thinking though. Blacksmiths don't just make swords. So even if that were true, that they're losing money on making swords, they wouldn't make swords anymore. They'd make other weapons.
And inferior magic swords. How hard would it have been for the developers to program it so a good chunk of the people you fight against use these bound swords instead of steel ones? Like in the game, you come across like the rare Falmor patrol who uses them, but it would be logical to have a way larger chunk of the population use these fantastic weapons because they're free, look badass, and do more damage than a common steel sword. How about
they do more damage than a sword? I will actually look it up just so you know. Damage comparison. Oh. Where is it? Let's look on Reddit. Did we? I messed up, sorry. Bound weapons. I find a bound sword damage. So it's a base of 9 damage. So let's look up steel sword Skyrim damage. Base damage. 8. So it's 1 damage higher than a steel sword. So but any other metal, because you have things like dwarven sword, is 10. The next level above steel is already better. So there's an issue because blacksmiths could make any weapon that's better and still make a living off of that. Although, like I said, it's true that soldiers would be trained on using bound sword because it saves them a lot of money.
whenever you walk into a blacksmith shop, instead of saying,
"We've got small weapons as well as big. Maces, daggers, that sort of thing."
he instead tries really, really hard to sell you on the idea that real steel weapons are superior to all of that magic crap in an attempt to sell you a...
The issue is he's saying that bound sword is every weapon. It's just bound sword. And it's a curved sword at that. It's not a straight sword. Or it's not an arming sword. Because there's preferences in type of sword that you want to use, because each sword has its own benefit.
Because of course he would, if this world were real. He's desperate to sell as much merchandise as he can, because he's been selling so little of it as of late, and he wants to feed his family. How
Only
hard would it be
bound
to
sword,
add like
though.
a quest where there are 2 rival blacksmiths in one town, and the town isn't big enough for the 2 of them? The state of the economy means that the demand for their work is too low to sustain both rival blacksmiths. So
No,
then the player has to
not how
decide
it
in the
works,
quest
sorry.
which of the blacksmiths they want to sabotage by framing them for a crime and which one they want to help. Or the player can do nothing and leave them to slowly bleed to death financially. How hard would it have been to add these things? The answer is, of course, not at all. Adding any of these things would have been no harder than adding any other line of dialogue or any other quest, yet it would have done wonders to make the world feel way more dynamic as the...
It's an issue though, just because he keeps on saying that it means any weapon. That real steel on any weapon is better than all that magic stuff going around. You mean the one spell that everybody's learning? Because bound bow is not... You can look, watch. Bound bow. Bound bow. It is an adept spell, which means it's a 3rd level spell, right? Or wait, let me see. Bound bow. Magic levels in Skyrim. Novice, apprentice, adept. Yeah, it's a 3rd level magic spell that bound bow is. So just to say that every weapon is out of sale from blacksmiths because of magic going around is ridiculous. He's equating just a simple magic curved sword, because let's see what the shape of it is. Find it.
Sword
I want
existing.
a good yeah. It's a serrated bound sword. Why would you ever want to use a serrated sword in a combat situation? In a military situation? Because serrated weapons get stuck when you try to slash someone with them in real life. I think it's so dumb to equate a steel sword to this bound, serrated, curved sword. They have their advantages and disadvantages, yeah. But there could be, there's so much that you have to do in the game to make sure that people understand what the effectiveness of certain weapons are. Or God. See, this is where a lot of the closer look videos usually fall apart, is near the end when he starts making suggestions, because the suggestions aren't as well thought out as he thinks they are. Because I'm just taking a couple seconds, or not even a couple seconds. I'm taking quite a long time just thinking about what he's saying and going, okay, but this still doesn't make sense. Because we have this stuff.
The player would have this strong sense that the world is real because it's so carefully considered, and because it's finally got.
But that's not carefully considering swords, considering what the job of a blacksmith is. Because yes, some people will make what is it? You make like a work order. The government will come down and say, "Hey, we need a bunch of swords by this time. Can you do that?" And they go, "Sure. How much money are you paying me?" "This much." That's great. But a blacksmith in real life can also say, "Hey, do you need any armor as well? Or do you need any war hammers or Beck to Corbins?" Or like, there's so many different weapons that aren't just swords. Or even battle axes, because he's not even mentioning conjured battle axe, which is pretty decent spell. Oh my god. Gotta take a chill pill with your suggestions, because they're not very well thought out.
Got an economy that actually works. If only they had 5 spells.
The economy doesn't work if the blacksmiths are only making swords. Because that's what he's implying by saying that they would all go out of business because they don't make swords. They can't make swords anymore because they can just summon one.
Instead of 100, but they fleshed those 5 spells out so thoroughly, so.
Because yes, in real life, a serrated weapon will do more damage, but it does get stuck in your enemy, which means making it swing slower, making it so you can deal less damage over a period of time than a weapon that's properly sharpened and has no serration to it. That's the reason we have like those spikes on the end of spears. Like, let me look up a short spear. So any of this type of stuff would be more like a javelin, right? But if you have, let's see. Okay, let me just look up war spear, because short spear isn't doing it for some reason. These are all glaives and stuff. Yeah, but see this? This thing right here is to stop you from going too far into your enemy and getting stuck. There are plenty of things that designers for weapons have put into that. So yes, that sword does more damage in-game, but in World of Skyrim, I assure you that the conjured sword is not the most effective tool as a soldier.
Wonderfully, as we see the vast sweeping changes this magic would have on the world. I mean, sure, we'd have to give up the ability to shoot ice from our fingers, but it would have achieved the fundamental thing that great world building is all about. It would have made the world so much more interesting, so much cooler and immersive and awe-inspiring all in one go.
I'm sorry, but just because you think it's immersive doesn't mean it truly is. Because the suggestions don't make it more immersive. They just create some issues with understanding. Because it's just like if you didn't do enough research when you're trying to cover a culture, and then you misinterpret something and make it seem like it's a lot different. You want your research to be well done before you make a world that emulates a time period or a certain region of the world. So in this case, because I know it's just a thought experiment for him, but he's not thinking about what a blacksmith can do. Because he sees this image, and just blocks out this, this, and this, and just says, yeah, this wouldn't be able to be sold anymore, which means they would go out of business. It's, come on, man. You got this.
But do let me know what you think. Do you think that I'm right, or seemingly, as per always, do you think I'm wrong? I'd love to know what you think in the comments.
Oh, no, I think you're wrong about your suggestion, your specific suggestions, but making a world more immersive does make a world more enjoyable to play in, I would say. Because Skyrim, I've played so many times, but just without spells. The only spell I'll ever use is Muffle, because I like illusion magic, and it's the only one that truly captures illusion magic, besides invisibility, but you have to do the magic college quest line to do that, and I don't like it. But I hope you see what I mean by he means well. The closer look means well, but he has some horrible suggestions. So let's take a look at some of the comments and see what they say. 16 days of work to produce. Okay, yeah. Understandably, because it's a lot of cuts and stuff. But dude, you gotta think more about the writing of your thing rather than the production. The annoying part is they have thought of this in Morrowind. They had shackles that drained your mana, so you couldn't use spells. That's pretty big. Okay, that's not important. I just find it hilarious that there is a stressed not spelled correctly, is that? Placed on getting a shiv. Yeah. But everyone has pickaxes. Yes, true. Because the whole quest line involves you getting a shiv, but you can use a pickaxe as a weapon. I did it in my run through of that place because they didn't know how to. My first ever run through of that mine, I specifically just picked up a bunch of pickaxes and started swinging at people. Okay. My issue with the magic system is it's far too weak. Okay, see, that's probably the biggest reason why I had a problem with the magic system, is not necessarily that it's not even that well thought out. I don't like using magic in that game because you have to cast constantly, and you do just about as much damage as someone who's just clicking the mouse button over and over. In a very different direction than I did with exploring. I was thinking people in power would try to hide the knowledge of that spell. True. Well, that's what my idea was about, a guild not even letting that knowledge get out. Not because they don't want to save money, but instead they want to control people. Yes, true. If anyone can summon a weapon from nothing, and then you'll have to keep an eye out at all times, since anyone could suddenly stab you. Yeah, very true. With a real sword, that is definite concern, but you can see the weapon at their side. True. Oh yeah, there's no evidence left behind either, because sometimes chips of weapons can get caught on bone, and then you have evidence of what type of weapon they were using. But with a conjured sword, it's all traces of that sword is gone once you drop the spell. See this guy did even more regarding that. Oh yeah, Mirak is the librarian. I don't know if he spent thousands of years though, but he does use sparks, which is hilarious. This went very different direction. Oh yeah, it's not very fun or satisfying to use. true. In most cases. I think rune spells are pretty cool, but they're so expensive to use that you have to constantly level magicka to even use a little bit of it. Oh yeah, here it was. Even Ulfric was gagged to stop the shouts. Like I said, like I mentioned earlier. Thank you for seeing my point. Okay, so now what we're going to do is anybody has a suggestion on a magic system that they want to add, let me know. I'm going to get some water. You can do it. I can hear you if you leave. So just anything now if you want. Otherwise, I'm just making up something. Okay. It doesn't seem like anybody has any suggestions. So let's think of a random superpower or magic or anything that we can add to our world. So let's say we introduced tomorrow the world to a specific magic. Let's think of a magic system that we can think about. So, okay, well, I'm actually just going to take a specific one that I already know of because we've watched. Most of us have probably watched this movie, but Cloudy with I'm slow at typing, so give me some leeway there. Chance of meatballs. Cloudy with a chance of meatballs. The whole concept. The whole concept is we have. Let me make it bigger. The whole concept. We have a machine that Flint Lockwood makes. Turns water into food. One thing that's pretty interesting about that is what you can do is you can essentially create any food you want and have it rain from the sky. But there are some problems in that. So if you introduce this in real life, what's the first thing that you can think of that would be a real problem when you turn water into food? One thing that you probably haven't thought of is that water does not turn back, or no, sorry, food does not turn back into water at any point in the what cycle is it? In the digestive or waste process. As in, when you digest food, it doesn't turn back into water. So what does that do to the water? Water. Let's give a different thing because this is included in this bullet point. Water starts to disappear. What's up? Yeah. Okay. Water starts to disappear from the world. And we already know what the consequences of water disappearing from the world would be. But say we adapted it and just said, okay, how about it's only turns salt water into food. Oh, I didn't spell it right. Okay. Say we can only turn salt water into food. So we have ocean water. That could be an effective way of combating climate change. So if we had that in real life, what we could do is, so we have this, but it's a positive because we do have to eventually stop using it. So that's somewhat negative. But then we have, let's give another bullet point. Eventually, we would have to stop using it. But we could use it to combat the rising sea levels. Because that's a possible use that you could use for turning salt water into food. And what would this do? If we had to eventually stop using it, there would be mass famine, because if we had this technology, there's no chance we wouldn't rely on it and just stop production of food. So I can just have the world begins to rely on this technology to feed its populace. When the world is required to stop using it, what would the reactions of the governments be? So if there was a government that had been relying on it for years, would they eventually stop? Would they? Okay. When the world is required to stop using it, what would be the reactions of the governments? Because let's do another random. Is there any other way to do? Okay, yeah, we have plus. What would be the reaction of the governments? Would they stop feeding their citizens for the betterment, for the longevity of the world? Earth. So would there be a government that would be willing to take everybody down with them in this situation? Other implications of this. Why is it only limited to food? In what way is it limited to food? Because I think we'd have to know the quote that he uses, that Flint Lockwood uses to describe how it turns into food. But the biggest thing that I think of when we have this is you should be able to make other stuff too. It shouldn't be limited to just food. Oh god, burping a lot. But I think, so I'll just say, is it limited to just food? What about the process limits it to food? Yeah, so if it is just limited to food, what about the process limits it to just food? You can't just say it's the way it is because you're using a science at this point. Although, if you just say that the premise is that it can only create food, you could just scratch this so we can highlight it in gray, right? is it just limited food? We can scratch it if we don't need it, right? So let's take the highlighter off. What are other things that we could do with this? It's only one machine. So if it's only Flint's machine that can do this, then how would the economy, or how would he be allowed to control such powerful world-changing technology? Because he's a single person, right? It's like if someone in their backyard made up nuclear power, and then the government didn't go, "Hey, what you got there? Nuclear power? Sounds pretty interesting." This is the exact same situation you'd see with Flint's machine. Some governments would be interested in controlling it and offer him money or and then what happens when he dies? Who owns the machine? Who controls it? How does this technology not get stolen? But if it truly is limited to only the thing that Flint made, would anybody try to destroy it? Anybody who would higher ups at food production companies be interested in monopolizing it, the machine, or destroying it? Because there's so many other things that you have there. Is just from this one concept, there's so much there, and you don't really explore that in Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs because it's super recent that it was made, and it only hit publicity within like a month of the story happening, right? So there's not a lot of this that can happen. But then they have Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs too, and all that happens is they have just one person trying to destroy it, right? Destroy the machine for some reason. I actually don't remember much of the plot for that, but his motivation is the villain's motivation doesn't seem very well thought out, because he should try to control it and make it his own thing. Without government intervention, because he does live in a fictional place. He's in Swallow Falls, so his country is not really ruled by any higher up government. Like, their government is their mayor, I'm pretty sure. I actually don't know. I don't know the politics of Swallow Falls and Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, but that's fine. But you see what I mean? The reason why I like most of this video is they take the chance to do all this stuff, but his suggestions in this whole section right here, they don't take into account the world actually. They take into account so little. Because they limit how people function, right? They limit the blacksmith's capability as only being able to create weapons and swords, while expanding conjurable weapons into a field of any weapon that you want, which is completely dumb. It's a specific spell that was invented in that world. You can't just say that you can do anything you want. But I hope I've given you guys a glimpse into what I mean by magic and world building is really so. If you're having trouble world building, just take the magic that you have and think about what happens if that magic exists in a world, because it makes it so much it makes it so much easier to just think, or it makes it so much easier to world build if you just think about it from that perspective. It's like a cheat sheet almost. Half of the work that you do at world building would just be flushing out your magic. Because if you have one little element of your magic explored to death, you have a bit of your world building already built. And the reason this isn't too bad, like the reason Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs isn't bad, the biggest thing is that it's recently done. So the more recent a discovery for a specific magic system is in the story, the more you can get away with how the world would respond to certain things. That's why Marvel's having such a huge issue now with world building, because they're not taking into account how many huge events have been happening within the recent times in Marvel. Everything after Endgame is like that world should not be the same at all. People mention the blip in passing sometimes, or they mention other things in passing, but the world would be in total chaos after Endgame. And even after Avengers, there's not enough of the world getting crazy because of it. So it's but the reason Marvel's popular is because their characters are really good. So, but because they've been dropping the ball more on their magic, it makes the characters seem more dumb, because you have things that they could have done because they're adding new things that they can do. You're going, what? Why couldn't they do this earlier? It's not like they're not trained at that point in the story. So there's a huge, and there should be a bigger emphasis on world building in story writing, especially when you're writing fantasy. But even in science fiction, there's stuff that you should have people limited to. Like the one thing that I will say I don't like about the rings in Shang-Chi is I don't know what they can and can't do, honestly. I don't know. I would have preferred if they were like an extendable hand that have like a force in between them that you can't pass through, so you can hit someone with the invisible force. Because you can expand that so well with just that element. With just that element, you can expand it. But they don't do it. It's you could almost describe it how people would describe reverse magnetism, because if you put the north side, you guys know, put the north pole of the magnets together and they push away, you could have that be exactly how the rings work, but their magnet effect would only activate when doing a certain type of martial arts, which is why Shang-Chi would have a unique fighting style, because he's trained to use the rings by his father. There's because that's where they drop the ball in a lot of these newer Marvel movies, is there's such simple things they can do to world build that doesn't affect the rest of the Marvel universe, that you don't even have to address it in later context about like what happened in the original movie, because you can limit it so much better. Hmm. Sorry, I'm leading into just being disappointed in Marvel, but that's kind of where this conversation inevitably leads. Is the more elements you add, or more magical elements, not even magical. I'm just saying magical as in like stuff that doesn't happen in real life. Elements you add to the story, the harder it is to stay consistent with it. And I think that's where I'm going to end my stream for today. So thank you all for visiting, and I hope you guys have learned something about magic and world building, because I love magic and world building. I've been doing this with the kids that I work with lately. I said, okay, what superpower do you want? How what does it feel like when you're using it? How do you activate it? And all these things. And it's really fun for them, and it's really fun for me to see how they come up with rules for their magic. Because a superpower is a magic. But you can do this yourself. You can think about how a magic would change a world. And it's important to scrutinize the media you watch if they're not doing a good job. Because yes, I enjoy a lot of movies, but I can see flaws in them, and that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy the movie any less. And I feel like that should be for everybody. You should be able to see flaws in things without it brings us back to the Hassan issue. Learn to take criticism, or learn to deal out criticism and not think that you're attacking the movie. Or hear someone's criticism about a movie and not automatically think that they're attacking a movie or story or video game in this case, in the case with Skyrim. So thank you all, and I will see you next time. Hopefully in 2 days, doing more crazy Elden Ring runs. I'm ready to die again. Because I've been taking a break this week after beating the Draconic Tree Sentinel. So, bye-bye. I will be fighting Morgott, if you're wondering. And if you're interested in that, swing by on Tuesday, early morning, earlier than this stream. This is way too late. So, bye-bye. Have a good one.